You didn't press play on this audiobook because you were bored. You pressed play because something in you has been whispering for a while. This isn't normal anymore. Something is off. Maybe you call it stress. Maybe you call it being just tired. Maybe you tell yourself that everyone around you feels this way, that you just need a vacation, a long weekend, a better morning routine, a bit more willpower. There is another possibility that almost nobody talks about until it becomes impossible to ignore. Your brain might already be in burnout mode, quietly trying to protect you, while you keep asking it to push a little harder. Before you decide whether this book is truly for you, or whether you want to move on to something lighter, you deserve some clarity. So instead of asking you to trust any promises, let's start with something simple that you can feel directly in your own experience. A short test, about a minute long, that shows you whether you are dealing with ordinary tiredness or with a mind that has started to shut down under pressure. In a moment, you will hear a series of statements. Your only task is to notice, honestly, how many of them sound uncomfortably familiar. You can keep your reactions private. You can count silently. You can just sense that inner "yes, that's me" when it appears. No one is judging you here, and no one is listening to your answers except you. If you want, you can keep a quiet count in your head. Each time you recognize yourself, add one. Stay as honest as you can, because this is not about being strong or weak. It is about finally telling yourself the truth. Take one slower breath. Notice the weight you are carrying today. Let's begin. 1. You often wake up already feeling exhausted, even after what should have been a normal night of sleep. 2. Time off does not restore you the way it used to. Weekends, days off, or even vacations barely shift how drained you feel. 3. Everyday decisions that used to be effortless now feel heavier than they should. From choosing what to wear to deciding what to reply or what to cook. 4. Your memory slips in ways that surprise you. You lose words, names, or small tasks that once felt automatic. 5. You catch yourself staring at a screen, scrolling for several minutes, only to realize you barely registered anything you just saw. 6. Activities that used to bring you genuine joy now feel muted, distant, or simply fine, instead of truly alive. 7. You notice that you are more irritable, impatient, or emotionally flat with people you care about in ways that don't fit how you want to be. 8. There are moments when your life feels like it is happening on autopilot, and you are watching yourself go through the motions instead of fully living them. 9. You repeat the promise that you will take care of yourself when things calm down. Yet life never actually calms down enough for that promise to be kept. 10. Deep down, a quiet fear has appeared that something inside you is wearing out, but you feel too overwhelmed to look closely at it. Take a small pause now. Notice your number. You might not even have counted precisely, but your body knows whether most of those lines felt close to home. If only 1, 2, or 3 of those statements fit you, your brain is under real pressure, but it is still managing to compensate. You are carrying a lot, yet your mind is still juggling the load and holding things together. Listening to this book can help you understand what is happening long before your system hits a hard wall. If 4 to 7 of those descriptions felt accurate, your brain has likely moved beyond simple tiredness. It has started to switch off or dim certain functions in order to keep you running, because the demands placed on it have exceeded what it can comfortably handle. Focus, memory, motivation, and the ability to feel pleasure are not fading because you are weak. They are being rationed because your mind is in survival mode. If almost every line sounded painfully familiar, you already know on some level that this is not just about stress anymore. This is not a question of productivity techniques, stronger discipline, or getting your life together. This is what burnout in the brain feels like from the inside, long before most people ever seek help. No amount of shame, guilt, or self-criticism can repair a nervous system that has been pushed past its limits. Here is the part you may never have heard clearly. You are not broken. You are not lazy. You are not failing at being an adult human in a demanding world. Your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It is trying to protect you from overload by shutting down the most expensive systems first, even if that protection makes your life feel smaller, flatter, and more distant. This audiobook will not scold you, and it will not tell you to simply think positively or hustle smarter. Instead, it will walk you through what burnout actually does inside your mind, how it changes your thoughts, your emotions, your sense of self, and even your ability to want anything at all. And then, step by step, it will show you how to give your brain the conditions it needs to repair, reset, and slowly come back online. For now, you only need to answer one question as honestly as you can. Do you see yourself in what you just heard? If the answer is even a hesitant yes, then this is not just another piece of content to fill the silence while you drive, clean, or fall asleep. This may be the moment when you finally stop blaming your character for something that has been happening inside your nervous system for years. Your brain has carried you through deadlines, crises, responsibilities, and expectations that would have crushed a younger version of you. It deserves, at the very least, to be understood. In the first chapter, you will step inside the experience of burnout and see what it looks like from within your own mind before everything collapses completely. Once you see that inner landscape clearly, it will be very hard to keep telling yourself that this is just stress, or that you simply need to be stronger. If you are willing to look more closely at what is truly happening in your brain, turn the page, or simply keep listening. This is where the story of your burnout begins, and more importantly, where the possibility of your recovery starts to become real. Chapter 1. When your brain can't keep up. Imagine this moment. It's 7:42 p.m. on a Tuesday, and you're standing in your kitchen, staring at a half-chopped onion on the cutting board. The knife rests right there in your hand, but somehow you can't remember what you were planning to make for dinner. You literally drew a blank on chicken and rice, a meal you've cooked 100 times before, even though you're not particularly hungry and work emails aren't buzzing. As you stand there, a quiet wave of frustration rolls through you, because deep down you know this isn't the first time this has happened this week. Does that scene feel familiar? Maybe not exactly your kitchen, but close enough that you felt a small tightening in your chest just now. Hold that feeling, because what I'm about to show you is something most people never connect to burnout at all. They dismiss it as forgetfulness, a bad week, or simply life being busy, when in reality, it's the very first signal that your brain has quietly started to ration its energy. Not out of laziness, but from pure survival instinct. Burnout doesn't arrive like a dramatic collapse, complete with sirens and a hospital bed. It creeps in through these small, seemingly innocent moments that pile up until one day you wake up realizing your mind feels like it's running on fumes that never quite refill. And here's the part that surprises almost everyone. The people who burn out fastest aren't the weak ones, the complainers, or those who can't handle pressure. Burnout strikes the strongest first, the reliable ones everyone counts on, the high achievers who've spent years proving they can push through anything, the ones who never learned how to recognize when their brain was waving a white flag. David ran a mid-sized consulting firm, the kind where deadlines bleed into weekends, and clients expect miracles by Friday morning. For 12 years, he'd been the guy who delivered no matter what. Late nights turning into early mornings, family vacations cut short by one quick call, birthdays celebrated with laptop screens glowing in the background. Everyone admired him for it. "David's unbreakable," they'd say. Until one spring morning, when he sat down at his desk to answer a routine email and realized he couldn't form a single coherent sentence. His fingers hovered over the keys, his mind completely blank. And for the first time in his adult life, panic edged in about the sudden, terrifying awareness that something inside him had simply stopped working. What David experienced wasn't a dramatic breakdown. It was his brain's ancient protective mechanism kicking in. The one evolution designed for saber-toothed tigers and famines, not endless Zoom calls and 24/7 connectivity. You probably imagine burnout as crying in the shower or quitting your job in a blaze of glory. But here's what almost nobody understands. Your brain wasn't built for modern life. It evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to handle short bursts of intense stress, followed by long periods of recovery in caves or savannas, not the relentless drip of notifications, expectations, and decisions that never let up. When demands exceed what your nervous system can process, your brain doesn't throw a tantrum. It starts shutting down the most energy-intensive systems first. Clear thinking, emotional depth, even the spark of motivation that used to drive you forward. Those early signs are so subtle that most people dismiss them entirely. You wake up with a heaviness that coffee can't touch. You space out during conversations, snapping back only when someone repeats your name. A nagging sense of dread settles in on Sunday evenings, not tied to any one problem, just a diffuse cloud that makes the whole next week feel impossible. Small errors creep into your work. Typos in important emails, forgetting attachments, double booking meetings. Irritability flares up over nothing, like a misplaced key or a slow internet connection, leaving you wondering why you snapped at someone you love. These aren't random annoyances or signs of laziness. They're your brain whispering, "I can't keep up anymore. Slow down before I have to force you." But here, it gets particularly uncomfortable if you've built your identity around being strong, dependable, unbreakable. The strongest people burn out faster, precisely because they ignore those whispers longer than anyone else. Their brains, conditioned over years to push through pain, discomfort, and fatigue as proof of character, fail to distinguish between productive stress that builds you up and the toxic kind that silently rewires neural pathways for the worse. While someone less resilient might pause, reassess, or even ask for help at the first hint of trouble, you keep going, piling cortisol flood after cortisol flood into your system day after day, week after week, until your prefrontal cortex, that magnificent command center for focus, planning, and self-control, literally begins to shrink under the chemical onslaught. Consider Sarah for a moment. She managed marketing for a fast-growing tech startup, the kind where growth targets doubled every quarter and no wasn't in the vocabulary. For 8 years, she'd been the visionary who turned impossible campaigns into industry awards, the one who mentored junior staff while handling C-suite presentations. Her team called her the machine that never stopped. Until one client dinner, midway through explaining a multi-million-dollar strategy she'd perfected the night before, when her mind went completely silent. She stared at the CEO across the table, mouth half open, unable to retrieve even the most basic talking points. The room waited politely, but inside, Sarah felt something shift permanently. The first real crack in the foundation she'd spent nearly a decade building. In those very first weeks when burnout takes hold, specific changes unfold deep inside your brain, far beyond what any routine blood test or casual conversation with a therapist could reveal. Your amygdala, that small, almond-shaped alarm center buried in your temporal lobe, shifts into permanent overdrive, pumping stress hormones through your bloodstream around the clock like a car alarm that never quiets. Meanwhile, your hippocampus, the seahorse-shaped structure crucial for forming memories and putting stressful events into context, starts to atrophy under the onslaught. Which is exactly why reaching for simple information feels like grasping at smoke. Dopamine pathways, those delicate reward circuits that once made finishing a project or sharing a good meal feel truly satisfying, fade to almost nothing, leaving you trapped in a flat, joyless fog where even objective successes register as tasteless ash in your mouth. It's worth pausing here to really take this in, because most people never hear this part explained clearly. These aren't moral failures, lapses in willpower, or signs that you've suddenly become less than who you were. This is pure biology at work. Your brain methodically flipping every emergency circuit breaker it possesses to keep your heart pumping, your lungs expanding, and your basic survival systems online when the higher, more energy-hungry functions, like creativity, emotional connection, and future planning become unaffordable luxuries your overloaded nervous system can no longer afford. And if any of these descriptions, David's frozen fingers over the keyboard, Sarah's blank stare across the dinner table, or those quiet kitchen moments with the forgotten onion, feel uncomfortably close to your own recent experience, I want you to pause right now and recognize something absolutely vital. This isn't your fault. It's not a hidden character flaw that finally surfaced under pressure. You're living the entirely predictable limits of a human brain, dropped without warning into a world engineered to demand machine-level endurance from fragile biological systems. Here's what you can do today, not tomorrow, not when life gets easier. Take 5 minutes, literally set a timer if you need to, and write down 3 specific moments from the last week where you noticed your brain slipping. That forgotten errand, the conversation where you trailed off mid-sentence, the task you stared at but couldn't start. Don't judge them. Don't try to fix them. Just notice the pattern. Because that simple act of observation creates the first fracture in burnout's grip, the moment when "this is just me being tired" becomes "this is my brain asking for help, and I'm finally listening." Awareness alone cracks burnout's armor wide open, but understanding the signs only gets you halfway there. Because beneath those surface symptoms runs a hidden mechanism that's quietly eroding your mind from the inside out. One that most people never discover until everything collapses completely. You probably still think you can tough it out just a little longer, power through to the weekend, make it to vacation. And that exact belief is what makes Chapter 2 absolutely critical. Once you grasp how chronic stress doesn't merely exhaust you, but physically reshapes your brain's architecture, shrinking the prefrontal cortex, inflaming the amygdala, eroding the hippocampus, you'll never experience tiredness, fog, or frustration quite the same way again. Hold that thought tightly, because everything you're about to learn next will transform how you see every heavy morning, every foggy afternoon, and every restless night when sleep feels like a distant memory. Chapter 2. The Burnout Mechanism. How stress quietly breaks your mind. Sarah managed marketing for a fast-growing tech startup, the kind where growth targets doubled every quarter and impossible was just a starting point. For 8 years, she'd been the one who turned vague ideas into viral campaigns, mentoring junior staff while prepping C-suite presentations at 2 a.m. Her team called her the Engine. because she never stalled, never overheated, no matter how many consecutive all-nighters stacked up. Until one client dinner, midway through pitching a strategy she'd perfected the night before, when her mind simply went silent. She stared across the table at the CEO, mouth half open, basic talking points evaporating like mist. What happened to Sarah wasn't random. It was her brain's stress response hitting a tipping point. The exact moment when acute stress, the kind that sharpens you for a sprint, morphs into chronic stress, the kind that corrodes you from within. You felt both, even if you never named them. Acute stress rushes in like adrenaline before a big presentation or deadline. Heart pounding, senses sharpened, focus laser-like. Your body expects that state to end in victory, rest, celebration. But modern life rarely delivers that ending. Instead, it strings one acute stressor after another into an endless chain. Emails, meetings, notifications, conflicts. Until what should have been a brief survival boost becomes a permanent toxic bath. Here's what nobody tells you about cortisol, that stress hormone everyone vaguely knows about. It's not just the stress chemical. Cortisol follows a precise daily rhythm in a healthy brain, peaking in the morning to wake you up, then tapering through the day so you can wind down by evening. Acute stress spikes it briefly for fight or flight. Then insulin and other systems clear it out within hours. But chronic stress breaks that rhythm entirely. Your adrenal glands start pumping cortisol continuously, like a faucet left running, flooding every brain cell around the clock. And that flood doesn't sharpen you, it drowns you. Consider what happens to the three critical brain regions caught in that flood. First, the prefrontal cortex, your executive center for planning, decision-making, impulse control, and distinguishing important emails from spam, literally shrinks under prolonged cortisol exposure. Studies show it can lose volume in as little as 4 weeks of sustained stress, which is why complex tasks that once felt manageable now paralyze you. Second, the amygdala, your emotional smoke detector, hypertrophies, becoming hypervigilant and overreactive. So every minor setback feels like a catastrophe, and you snap at trivialities that wouldn't have registered before. Third, the hippocampus, your memory filing cabinet, atrophies fastest of all, impairing your ability to form new memories or retrieve old ones, leaving you grasping for words mid-sentence or forgetting why you walked into a room. But here's where the mechanism gets truly insidious, and why motivation, attention, and decision-making don't just fade. They break completely. Chronic cortisol disrupts dopamine signaling, the neurotransmitter that makes effort feel worthwhile. Normally, anticipating a reward, closing a deal, enjoying dinner, weekend plans, triggers dopamine release, propelling you forward. Under burnout, that circuit shorts out. Your brain learns that effort yields no pleasure, no payoff, so it stops even starting. Attention fragments because the prefrontal cortex can no longer filter distractions. Decisions stall because weighing options burns too many calories in an already energy-starved system. It's not laziness. It's your brain performing brutal triage, shutting down luxury functions to preserve breathing, heartbeat, basic survival. You notice this breakdown most clearly when pleasure itself disappears. That "I don't want anything" feeling isn't depression or moral failure. It's neurochemical. Chronic stress downregulates pleasure centers in the nucleus accumbens, so food tastes blander, relationships feel distant, achievements register flat. Your brain enters what researchers call anhedonia, the inability to anticipate or experience reward, as a protective measure. Why waste energy pursuing joy when survival demands every last glucose molecule? This creates the empty battery syndrome. Constant depletion with no meaningful recharge possible, because even rest under cortisol flood feels like treading water in a storm. What can you do today to interrupt this cycle before it hardens further? Start with something deceptively simple but neurologically powerful. For the next 24 hours, every time you feel that decision paralysis coming on, what to eat, what to reply, where to focus, pause and ask yourself one question. What's the smallest possible step I can take right now? Not the perfect step, not the productive step, just the tiniest movement that doesn't require your prefrontal cortex to fire on all cylinders. Reply to one sentence. Chop one vegetable. Walk to the door. Your brain will resist at first, trained to demand all or nothing. But each micro-win floods dopamine differently, not through grand achievement, but through proof that motion is still possible. Do this 5 times today. Notice what shifts. If you've ever wondered why just relaxing doesn't fix you anymore, or why pushing harder only digs the hole deeper, you're touching the mechanism itself. But understanding cortisol's destruction is only the foundation. Because in the next chapter, you'll see how that broken machinery turns even simple thinking into exhausting labor. Remember Sarah, frozen mid-pitch? What happened to her brain in the weeks leading up to that dinner will explain why your own thoughts feel heavier every single day. Keep listening. This is where exhaustion stops being a mystery and starts becoming something you can dismantle, piece by careful piece. Chapter 3. Cognitive Drain. When thinking itself becomes exhausting. Michael handled complex litigation for a major law firm, the kind of work where every comma in a contract could cost or save millions. For years, he had been the person partners called when a case was too complicated, too risky, too important to leave to anyone else. He could read through 1,000 pages of documents and hold every relevant detail in his head, rearranging arguments like chess pieces 3 moves ahead of everyone in the room. He prided himself on that sharpness, that quickness, that ability to cut through noise and see the core. One Tuesday afternoon, he was in a conference room with a longtime corporate client, going over a contract amendment he'd reviewed a dozen times. The client asked a routine question, one he had answered in different forms for most of his career. Michael opened his mouth to respond, and nothing came out. The legal term he needed, a basic concept he had explained since his early days as a junior associate, simply would not appear. He stared at the printed page, at his notes, at the client's expectant face, and felt his mind turn into a thick, silent fog. After a few seconds that felt like a full minute, he said something vague and clumsy, then quickly suggested they circle back after he'd double-checked the language. On paper, that moment was small. The client probably forgot it by the end of the day. But for Michael, it was a crack in the foundation of who he believed himself to be. His mind, the one thing he trusted more than anything else, had suddenly acted like it was no longer fully available to him. That small gap, that missing word, terrified him far more than any looming deadline or angry opposing counsel ever had. If you've ever found yourself staring at a simple email, unable to assemble a clear sentence, you already know a piece of what was happening in Michael's brain. If you've opened your banking app and then forgotten why you picked up your phone in the first place, or sat in front of your computer paralyzed by a to-do list that used to feel manageable, you've touched the same invisible wall. People often call this brain fog, as if it's just a bit of mental weather that will eventually pass. In reality, it is something far more specific and mechanical. Cognitive drain. Your brain's fuel system running so low that even basic thinking becomes a luxury. Here's the uncomfortable truth that almost no one explains clearly. Your brain is a greedy organ. It weighs about 2% of your body, but it consumes around 20% of your daily energy just to keep you awake, oriented, and capable of ordinary tasks like following a conversation, planning your day, or remembering where you put your keys. Under healthy conditions, that energy is managed smoothly. Some goes to focus, some to memory, some to emotional regulation, some to creativity. Under chronic stress and burnout, that balance collapses. Cortisol and other stress chemicals hijack the system, redirecting energy toward basic survival and away from higher functions. Your nervous system starts to behave like a city in a blackout, shutting down power to entire neighborhoods to keep the hospital and emergency services running. In that state, things you used to consider simple, making a grocery list, organizing your schedule, answering a thoughtful message, are no longer cheap for your brain. They become expensive decisions that require resources your system no longer has in reserve. This is why you can scroll social media or watch random videos for an hour, but feel unable to reply to one important email. Your brain is not broken. It is conserving energy. Passive consumption demands less from your prefrontal cortex than structured thinking, planning, or writing. So when energy is low, your mind chooses the path of least resistance, not because you're lazy, but because your system is quietly prioritizing survival over complexity. You feel guilty, you tell yourself you're procrastinating. But underneath that self-talk, your brain is simply saying, I cannot afford this level of effort right now. Cognitive flexibility, that mental agility that once allowed you to jump between tasks with ease, is one of the first abilities to erode under burnout. When you were functioning well, you could finish a call, shift to drafting a document, then pivot to helping a friend with a quick question, all without much friction. In burnout, each shift in focus feels like a hard gear change in an old car on a steep hill. Your mind resists transitions, clings to one activity, or freezes in the space between them. Even asking yourself, what should I do next, can trigger a wave of dread, because choosing means engaging circuits that are already overworked. Multitasking pours gasoline on this fire. Every time you jump from one tab to another, from a message to a document to a notification back to a call, your brain spends energy not only on the tasks themselves, but on the act of switching. It has to remind itself what the task was, reload the context, suppress the previous activity, and refocus. All of that happens below your conscious awareness, but you feel it as mental fatigue, irritability, and that strange sensation of losing time without remembering what you actually did. The more you split your attention, the more fragmented and drained you become, even if you never finish anything meaningful. Errors are another predictable consequence of this cognitive wear and tear. You attach the wrong file to an email. You send a message to the wrong person. You schedule 2 meetings at the same time. You reread the same sentence 3 times and still miss a glaring mistake. On the surface, these seem like carelessness. Inside the brain, they are signs that working memory, the part of your mind that holds information temporarily while you manipulate it, is maxed out. When working memory is overloaded, something has to drop. Your system silently decides what to let go of, and often it chooses the step you would never consciously skip. The quick double-check, the last scan before sending, the pause to confirm. The most painful part is not even the mistakes themselves, but the story you tell yourself about them. You may start to think, I'm losing it, I'm not sharp anymore, or I can't handle what I used to. Shame wraps itself around every small slip. You compare your current self to an earlier version of you, the one who could juggle 10 projects without blinking. And you judge yourself harshly for not keeping up. That self-judgment becomes its own additional stressor, stealing even more cognitive energy and pushing your already exhausted system deeper into overload. You need to hear this clearly. The problem is not that you suddenly became less intelligent or less capable. Your brain is protecting itself the only way it knows how, by pulling back from high-cost activities when it no longer has enough fuel to run them safely. Thinking, focusing, deciding, and planning are expensive operations. In burnout, your system behaves like a business in crisis, cutting everything that is not absolutely essential to staying alive. Unfortunately, that includes exactly the abilities that made you feel like yourself. So what can you actually do today in the middle of this cognitive drain, when the idea of fixing your life feels laughably out of reach? You start small, so small that your exhausted brain does not revolt. For the next 24 hours, try this: the one-tab rule. Whether you are on a computer or a phone, keep only one window, one app, or one document open at a time. If you need to switch, close what you were using before you open the next thing. When your hand automatically reaches for another tab or another app, notice the urge, take one slow breath, and gently bring yourself back to the single thing you chose. This sounds almost trivial, but neurologically, it is powerful. By reducing constant context switching, you ease the load on your prefrontal cortex and working memory. You give your brain one clear track instead of 5 competing ones, and you reclaim pockets of energy that used to vanish into the chaos of half-finished tasks. You may not feel a miracle on day 1, but pay attention to the subtle shifts. A little less confusion when you return to a document, a little less dread when deciding what to do next, a little more sense of completion when something is actually done instead of endlessly open in the background. If the one-tab rule feels too hard right now, that is information, not failure. It means your cognitive reserves are even lower than you thought. And that is precisely why this chapter matters. Feeling exhausted by thinking is not a personality flaw. It is a sign that your brain has been overclocked for too long, running at a speed and intensity it was never designed to sustain indefinitely. And this is only one layer of burnout. When your thoughts start to fail you, it is frightening. But when your emotions begin to misfire or switch off, when joy disappears and irritation becomes your default, the experience shifts into an even more confusing territory. In the next chapter, you will see how burnout does not stop at your ability to think. It reaches deep into your capacity to feel, care, connect, and find meaning. Michael's frozen silence in that conference room was not just about memory. It was also about the emotional weight he had been carrying for years. That emotional collapse is where we are going next. Because until you understand what burnout does to your feelings, you will keep blaming your heart for what is, in fact, happening in your brain. Chapter 4. Emotional collapse. When your feelings stop working properly. Elena built her consulting business from nothing, turning raw ambition and relentless hustle into a thriving firm with a dozen employees who depended on her vision. For 7 years, she had been the energetic force that kept morale high, that celebrated wins with genuine enthusiasm, that motivated her team through setbacks with real optimism. Clients loved her because she brought not just expertise, but genuine passion to their problems. Her friends envied her capacity to find joy in small things: a good coffee, a sunset, time with family. She was the kind of person people wanted to be around because her energy was infectious. Then came a quiet Tuesday, when her daughter achieved something significant. A school achievement Elena would normally have celebrated with photographs, messages to family, the kind of pride that made moments feel vivid and alive. But as her daughter ran toward her with the news, Elena felt almost nothing. A flatness. A polite smile that was technically appropriate, but rang hollow even to herself. She went through the motions of celebrating. But inside there was no spark, no warmth, no sense of connection. That absence of feeling frightened her more than any crisis would have. What Elena was experiencing is something most people misinterpret entirely. They might call it depression or apathy or just being in a bad mood that won't lift. In reality, it is emotional blunting, one of burnout's cruelest manifestations. Your emotions do not simply fade like a dimmer, slowly lowering the lights. They disconnect, as if someone installed a thick glass wall between you and the world, allowing you to see everything happening, but preventing you from truly feeling it. Here is what almost no one explains about the neurobiology of emotions in burnout. Your emotional system is deeply tied to dopamine and serotonin, those neurotransmitters that color your internal experience and make life feel worth living. Under normal, healthy conditions, your brain releases these chemicals in response to meaningful events. Connection with someone you love, completion of a project you cared about, even the simple pleasure of good food or comfortable rest. These chemical signals are what make experience feel alive, what differentiate between life is happening and I am actually present for my life. Chronic stress and persistent cortisol flooding do something insidious to these systems. They downregulate dopamine receptors, essentially making your brain less responsive to pleasure signals, even when they are being sent. You complete something you work toward, but instead of that surge of satisfaction, you feel a flat, okay, that is done. You spend time with someone you love, but instead of warmth and connection, you feel preoccupied or numb. Your brain is not malfunctioning, it is in a protective state. By dimming pleasure receptors, it prevents you from expending energy on reward-seeking or emotional investment when your system is already depleted. It is survival mode, not character flaw. But emotional numbness is not the only way burnout attacks your feelings. For some people, the opposite happens first. Irritability and emotional reactivity surge, while appropriate emotional responses disappear. You snap at someone for a minor inconvenience. You feel rage at an email that should have provoked nothing more than a sigh. You become sharp, defensive, brittle, and afterward, you cannot explain why you reacted so intensely. That is your amygdala, that almond-shaped threat detector, running in permanent overdrive. Chronic stress keeps it inflamed and hyperactive, so it perceives danger and offense everywhere, flooding your system with fight-or-flight chemicals over trivial provocations. What makes this pattern particularly cruel is that it creates a vicious cycle. You snap at someone you care about. Guilt and shame follow. That emotional activation further exhausts your already depleted system, which makes you even more irritable next time. And the people around you, confused by your sharp reactions to ordinary things, start to withdraw, creating the experience of isolation even when you are surrounded by others. They may not realize your harshness is not your true nature, but a symptom of a nervous system in crisis. Some people experience yet another pattern, a kind of emotional regression, where the steady, mature responses you have cultivated over years simply vanish under pressure. Small setbacks that you would normally handle with perspective feel devastating and personal. Criticism lands like a physical blow. A canceled plan triggers disproportionate disappointment. You cry more easily, or you cannot cry at all. You swing between emotional extremes. Your internal experience feels unpredictable, like someone else is operating your emotional dial and you are merely watching. What unites all these patterns? The numbness, the irritability, The regression is that they are not character flaws or signs that you are broken inside. They are predictable outputs of a nervous system running past its limits. Your emotional systems evolved in a context where major stressors were acute and occasional. A predator, a fight, a food shortage, a threat to your tribe. Your brain knew how to mobilize for those situations and then recover afterward. But modern burnout is different. It is a low-grade chronic activation that never fully resolves, keeping your emotional machinery in a degraded state indefinitely. One more emotional consequence deserves its own emphasis: apathy, which is distinct from depression. Depression often includes sadness or pain. Apathy is the absence of care itself. You know intellectually that you should care about things, your work, your relationships, your future, your health. But the feeling is not there. It is like looking at your life through a window after the glass has frosted over. You can see shapes and movements, but there is no texture, no warmth, no sense of "this matters to me." This protective numbness makes sense evolutionarily. If your system is starved, why waste energy caring about things you cannot change? But it makes life feel hollow and mechanical in ways that are difficult to explain to anyone who has not felt it. Beyond the subjective experience of feeling less, there are real physiological changes happening in your brain during emotional collapse. Cortisol damages the hippocampus, which does not just store memories, but also provides emotional context to those memories. Past successes stop feeling as meaningful. Old joys become harder to recall vividly. The prefrontal cortex, which normally regulates amygdala reactivity and moderates emotional responses, shrinks and weakens. So you have less ability to talk yourself down from emotional spirals. Your nervous system loses the ability to distinguish between a genuinely dangerous threat and a benign stressor. Everything gets treated as an emergency, or everything gets treated as pointless. There is no middle ground. The fear that often accompanies emotional collapse adds another layer of pain. People begin to worry that this numbness or volatility is permanent, that they have become a different, worse version of themselves. You might fear that you have lost the capacity for joy, that you will never feel present with people again, that your heart has hardened beyond repair. That fear itself becomes another stressor, another chemical hit to an already fragile system. You interpret emotional flatness as proof of emotional brokenness, when in reality it is a temporary state that will shift once your nervous system is no longer in survival mode. Here is what needs to happen today, right now, not to fix your emotions, but to begin giving your nervous system permission to recover. For the next 72 hours, 3 days, make one simple commitment. Notice without judgment. Every time you feel nothing when you expect to feel something, or feel too much when the situation calls for moderation, just notice it. Do not try to change it. Do not tell yourself stories about what it means. Simply observe internally. My emotional response is muted right now, or I snapped more sharply than the moment warranted. That simple act of observation, without self-criticism, begins to create distance between you and the symptom. You are no longer identified with the flatness. You are the one aware of it. That subtle shift is where recovery begins. Additionally, do something that is deliberately, consciously small and aimless with someone you trust, if that is possible. Not to be productive or rebuild connection, but simply to exist in the presence of another human. A short walk, sitting silently in the same room, a cup of tea. The point is not to manufacture feeling, but to create conditions where feeling might naturally emerge. Without pressure or expectation, your brain needs microdoses of safety and connection to begin recalibrating its emotional thermostat. You are not trying to feel happy. You are creating the neurological preconditions where happiness becomes possible again. What you are experiencing emotionally is not your true nature revealing itself to be empty or broken. It is your nervous system in protective shutdown, dimming the lights to conserve power while your system desperately needs to recover. And when you finally understand this, when you realize your emotional flatness is not a defect but a symptom, the shame around it often begins to lift. That shame is often what keeps people stuck longest. They believe their emotional numbness or reactivity proves something is wrong with them fundamentally, when in fact it proves only that they have been under more stress than a human nervous system can comfortably sustain. But emotional collapse is not just about feeling less or feeling wrong in the moment. It is deeply connected to something even more destabilizing: the collapse of your sense of identity, your core understanding of who you are. And that is where the real crisis accelerates. Because when your thoughts are foggy and your emotions are unreliable, the last thing to crumble is your sense of self. In Chapter 5, you will see what happens when burnout reaches that deepest layer. When the question shifts from "what is wrong with my brain" to "who am I if I am not the person I have always believed myself to be?" Elena's loss of joy in that moment with her daughter was not really about a single emotion. It was the first crack in a far larger collapse of identity that we are about to explore. Chapter 5. The Identity Crash. When your sense of self breaks down. Robert spent 23 years building a career as a senior architect. The kind of professional whose name appeared on buildings, whose designs were studied in architecture schools, whose opinions shaped the vision of his entire firm. He had defined himself through that work completely. Not just because it paid well, but because it gave his life structure, meaning, and a clear answer to the question, "Who are you?" For more than 2 decades, he was Robert the visionary, Robert the reliable, Robert the one people turned to when they needed something impossible made real. When burnout finally caught up with him, it did not arrive as a dramatic crisis. It came as a gradual erosion, a slow fading of the things that made him feel like Robert at all. The projects that used to excite him now felt like obligations. The mentorship of junior architects, once deeply rewarding, became exhausting theater. His design ideas, which had always flowed easily, now felt forced and uninspired. He would sit at his desk staring at blank screens, unable to access the creative confidence that had always been his superpower. And one morning, sitting in a meeting where his opinion was being sought, he realized something terrifying. He no longer knew who he was if he was not the person who had the answers. This is where burnout reaches its deepest and most destabilizing layer. Not just the breakdown of thinking or feeling, but the dissolution of identity itself. Most people do not talk about this part, because it is difficult to articulate and even harder to admit. You might describe the physical symptoms, the memory loss, the inability to focus. You might confess that you feel emotionally numb or irritable. But admitting, "I do not know who I am anymore," feels dangerously close to admitting a kind of psychological unraveling that seems too serious to name. Yet this identity crash is almost inevitable once burnout reaches a certain depth. Here is why. Your sense of self is not some fixed, unchanging core that exists independent of your life circumstances. Identity is constructed continuously through your actions, your achievements, your relationships, your roles, and the internal narrative you tell yourself about what all of that means. When you are functioning well, that narrative stays coherent. I am someone who accomplishes things. I am someone people can count on. I am someone who has the skills to handle challenges. That story reinforces itself daily through small victories, recognition, and the internal feeling that your efforts matter and produce results. Burnout tears holes in that narrative. When your cognitive systems fail, you can no longer access the feeling of competence that comes from solving problems cleanly. When your emotional systems shut down, you lose the satisfaction that comes from meaningful connection or the pride that comes from achievement. When your motivation collapses, you cannot generate the energy needed to pursue the things that once defined you. The structure that held your identity together begins to crumble, and suddenly you are left asking questions that feel destabilizing. If I am not the person who can do this, who am I? If I cannot access the things that made me feel like myself, what is even left? For high achievers, for people who have built their identity on competence, reliability, resilience, this identity crash is particularly brutal. Your entire self-concept is bound up with being the one who does not break, who handles pressure, who delivers. Burnout says no to all of that in a way that feels like it negates who you are at your core. The person who prides themselves on problem-solving suddenly cannot even decide what to eat. The person who is known for reliability suddenly forgets commitments. The person who has always been steady suddenly feels emotionally volatile. From the outside, these might look like temporary lapses. From the inside, they feel like proof that you are fundamentally not who you thought you were. What happens next is a kind of desperate grasping for the identity you are losing. You might push harder, trying to force yourself to be the person you have always been, working longer hours to prove you are still capable. You might become defensive or resentful of people pointing out that you are struggling, because acknowledging the struggle feels like admitting that you are broken. You might withdraw from relationships and activities that once defined you, telling yourself it is temporary, but secretly fearing that you have lost the capacity for the things you love. You might develop a new, smaller identity based entirely around your deficits. I am someone who is burned out. I am someone whose brain no longer works. I am someone who used to be competent, but now is failing. And underneath all of that is a fear that is rarely spoken aloud, but deeply felt. What if this is permanent? What if you never get back to feeling like yourself? What if the person you were is actually gone, and you are left with this diminished version forever? That fear is paralyzing, because it calls into question not just your current state, but your future possibility. If identity is already fractured and you cannot see a path to reconstruction, why bother? That is often the point at which hopelessness begins to settle in. But here is something critical that burnout obscures completely. Your identity is not actually broken. It is temporarily inaccessible, like a computer system that is running so slowly that you cannot reach the files you need. The sense of self that feels gone is not destroyed. It is buried under exhaustion, neurochemical dysregulation, and the protective shutdown of the systems that normally sustain it. When people recover from burnout, they do not become different people. They become themselves again, often with new understanding, new boundaries, new wisdom about what they need to survive and thrive. The identity questions that burnout raises are real and important, but they need to be asked from a place of clarity, not crisis. Right now, in the middle of burnout, your mind is not in a position to accurately assess who you are or who you might become. Your brain is too depleted. Your emotions are too dysregulated. Your narrative is too distorted by the protective mechanisms trying to keep you functioning. Trying to answer, "Who am I really?" while your nervous system is in survival mode is like trying to read a map during an earthquake. The information is technically there, but you cannot perceive it accurately. So what you need to do today is something that might seem counterintuitive. Stop trying to reconstruct your identity right now. Not forever, but for this phase, while you are still in acute burnout. Instead, create what you might think of as an identity pause. This means deliberately, consciously step back from the roles and achievements and narratives that have been carrying the weight of your self-concept. Not because they are bad or wrong, but because they are currently inaccessible to you, and clinging to them only deepens the pain. Here is the practice. Write down 3 things you were or did before you had these roles that define you now. Not, I am a lawyer, or I am a manager, or I am someone people depend on. Go earlier. What did you enjoy doing as a younger person that had nothing to do with achievement or productivity? What made you laugh? What felt easy and natural? What did you spend hours on without thinking about whether it was worth it? Do not overthink this. The answers do not have to be profound. They might be, I liked building things with my hands, or I read voraciously, or I spent time in nature without purpose, or I made people laugh at parties. You are not trying to rebuild your entire identity from these fragments. You are simply creating evidence that there is a version of you that exists independent of your roles and achievements. The reason this matters is that when you can locate even small pieces of yourself that are not contingent on performance, you begin to create space between your worth as a human and your productivity as a professional. This is not permanent, but while your system is recovering, that space is essential. It gives your nervous system permission to exist without constantly trying to prove something through achievement or competence. There is also something you need to know about identity and burnout that might provide a strange kind of relief. The identity you are losing is not entirely who you were meant to be. This is not to say your achievements were not real or meaningful. They were. But if your entire sense of self was built on constant striving, on being the person who never broke, on deriving your worth from what you produced, then burnout is in some ways forcing a reckoning you probably needed anyway. Many people who recover from burnout describe feeling like they have been given an unexpected gift. The chance to rebuild their identity in a way that is more spacious, more honest, more sustainable. But you cannot see that possibility right now. And that is okay. Right now, your only job is to survive this identity crash without letting it convince you that you are fundamentally broken. You are not. You are temporarily reorganizing. You are not becoming a lesser version of yourself. You are in a necessary pause where the old structure is no longer holding and the new one has not yet formed. That in-between space is disorienting and frightening, but it is also the only place where genuine transformation becomes possible. The reason I am emphasizing this now is because what comes next, understanding the specific triggers and systems that created this burnout in the first place, will only make sense if you can hold on to this. You are not broken, and your burnout is not a personal failure. It is a system failure. Your brain and nervous system are not defective. The modern world you are living in is simply mismatched with what human biology can sustain indefinitely. In Chapter 6, you will see exactly how that mismatch happens, how the specific pressures of contemporary life are almost engineered to exceed human limits. And once you understand that, blame and shame start to dissolve, and the possibility of actual recovery becomes real. Chapter 6. The Hidden Triggers of Burnout in Modern Life. On paper, Daniel's life looked stable, even enviable. A decent job, a small team he managed, evenings technically free, weekends that were not officially booked with overtime. No ICU shifts, no high-risk deals, no screaming emergencies. And yet, he woke up every morning with the same bone-deep exhaustion as people working 2 or 3 jobs. His calendar lied. His nervous system told the truth. What Daniel didn't see, what most people don't see, was that his brain was never actually off. He woke up to an alarm on his phone, swiped away 3 notifications before his feet hit the floor, checked email on the toilet, scrolled news while coffee brewed, glanced at messages on the way out the door. During the day, he bounced between project updates, chat pings, quick calls, and urgent emails flagged by someone else's anxiety. In the evening, he collapsed on the couch with a streaming show playing while his hand mindlessly refreshed his social feed every few seconds. Technically, he wasn't working late. Neurologically, his brain hadn't had a single true, uninterrupted pause all day. You might think burnout only belongs to people with dramatic, high-stakes lives, surgeons, founders, first responders. But there is a quieter, more universal version now. The burnout of ordinary overstimulation, the kind that comes not from one huge demand, but from 1,000 tiny ones that never stop. Your nervous system does not differentiate much between a looming deadline and a constant stream of pings, dings, and micro-demands for your attention. To your brain, every notification is a small, "Look at this now," a mini spike of adrenaline, a nudge of "respond," or something might go wrong. You live in a permanent low-grade emergency. Your brain was never designed for this. For most of human history, environmental stimulation came in waves. Intense, time-limited challenges, followed by long stretches of relative quiet. There were no glowing rectangles in the cave, no global news cycle, no invisible crowd of acquaintances peering into your life. The default state for the human nervous system was not constantly on. It was intermittent engagement, then deep rest, physical, mental, and sensory. Modern life has inverted that pattern completely. Now, true quiet is rare and must be aggressively protected, while stimulation is our baseline. Even when you're not actively working, you are absorbing headlines, opinions, tragedies on the other side of the world, vacation photos, status updates, subtle messages about what you should be doing, buying, becoming. Your eyes, ears, and mind are taking in data almost every waking moment. And because this stimulation feels normal now, you underestimate how much it costs you. There is another hidden trigger that pours fuel on this fire: comparison. Social platforms, professional networks, even casual group chats create a constant backdrop of other people's best moments. You might think you are just keeping up, but your brain is running a permanent, unconscious calculation. Where do I stand? Am I behind? Am I failing? Every career update, every fitness transformation, every "we finally bought the house" post quietly whispers to your nervous system, you are not doing enough. That message turns your entire life into a never-ending performance review. You are never simply living. You are constantly being measured. Or at least, that is how your brain experiences it. Then there is productivity culture, that invisible religion of modern life. You know its commandments by heart. Maximize every minute, eliminate waste, optimize, improve, grow. You are praised when you sacrifice rest for output, when you cram more into your schedule, when you wear busyness like armor. Slowing down feels guilty. Saying, "I'm not doing anything this weekend," feels almost like a confession. Rest has stopped being rest and has become recovery for the next round of effort. Something you must justify rather than something you're simply allowed to have. In this environment, even your attempts at relaxation can turn into another form of work. You listen to a podcast to learn, You read a book to upgrade your skills. You track your sleep instead of just sleeping. You go for a walk but turn it into a step-counting challenge. Your nervous system does not get the message, "You are safe now." It gets the message, "Even your downtime must be productive." That means your stress switch never truly flips off. It just changes costume. You may have noticed another phenomenon. Rest no longer restores you the way it used to. You take a weekend off and still feel depleted. You go on vacation and come back just as tired, or even more irritable. Part of this is because the way we rest now often keeps us in the same stimulated, fragmented state as our work. If your time off is filled with screens, notifications, comparison, and information overload, your brain does not register it as rest. It registers it as a change of scenery with the same level of noise. All of this creates a cruel illusion. You tell yourself you are not working that hard, so you shouldn't be this tired. You blame yourself for weakness. You think, other people have it worse. Why can't I handle this? But your nervous system is not reacting to the hours on your timesheet. It is reacting to the total load. The sum of every demand on your attention, every micro-stressor, every unresolved problem that lives in the back of your mind like a browser tab that never closes. So let's name some of the hidden triggers clearly, so your brain can stop pretending this is all just life. The constant stimulation of devices that never let your attention fully rest. The digital overload of information you cannot process, but still carry. The social comparison that keeps you in a quiet panic about being behind. The pressure to be relentlessly productive, even in your rest. The blurring of boundaries between work and home, day and night, public and private. The emotional weight of global crises that your nervous system absorbs without any real power to change them. None of this is your fault. You did not design this environment. You were dropped into it. The question then is not, why am I burning out? The more honest question is, how could I not be? In a world that constantly exceeds what human biology evolved to handle, burnout stops looking like a personal failure and starts looking like a predictable outcome. So what can you do in a world you cannot fully change? You start by creating small, fiercely protected pockets where your nervous system can actually tell that the emergency is over, even if it is only for a few minutes at a time. Here is your practice for the next 3 days. Build one no-signal zone into each day. Not a whole afternoon off, not a digital detox retreat. 10 to 15 minutes at a time, once a day, where you deliberately remove all external inputs. No phone, no laptop, no TV, no podcast, no book. Just you and something simple. A chair by the window, a short walk without headphones, sitting on a bench, lying on the floor, even a quiet shower where you're not mentally planning your next task. Your only job is to let your senses exist without being pulled somewhere. You will feel restless. Your brain, used to constant stimulation, will reach for something to chew on. Gently bring it back to the present. The feeling of air, the sounds in the distance, the weight of your own body. This is not about mindfulness perfection. It is about sending your nervous system a signal it badly needs. Right now, in this tiny slice of time, nothing is coming for you. Nothing is asking anything of you. You are allowed to not respond. Repeating this signal daily, even briefly, begins to unwind the belief that you must be constantly on guard. It is one of the few ways to let your stress response complete a full cycle instead of living forever half-finished. You may be tempted to think, 10 minutes won't change anything. That is burnout talking, the mindset that if it is not big and dramatic, it doesn't count. But your brain does not reset through grand gestures alone. It resets through repeated, consistent experiences of actual safety and non-demand. 10 honest minutes of no input each day will do more for your overloaded system than 2 hours of scrolling in the name of relaxing. Modern life is not going to slow down for you. The feeds will not empty themselves. The expectations will not collapse on their own. But you can begin, quietly and consistently, to step out of the stream in small intervals and give your brain a chance to remember what not under threat even feels like. That is not selfish. It is survival, because if you do not recognize these hidden triggers and start to push back, even in small ways, burnout will not just drain your energy. It will push you to the edge of a full internal shutdown. In Chapter 7, you will see what happens when you ignore these warning signs and keep living as if nothing is wrong. The final stage, where systems in your mind and body begin to fail more dramatically, and life itself starts to feel like it has come to a standstill. Understanding that edge is frightening, but it is also the wake-up call most people need before they finally decide to change course. Chapter 7. Hitting the limit. What happens when you ignore? Burnout. There is a point past which burnout stops being a state you can manage or minimize and becomes a crisis that dismantles your functioning in ways you cannot ignore. Most people wait until they hit that point before they take it seriously. By then, something inside has already broken. Marcus was a senior executive at a financial firm, the kind of guy who had weathered downturns, restructurings, and pressure that would have shattered ordinary people. He had prided himself on his resilience, his ability to compartmentalize stress, his capacity to show up perfectly composed no matter what was burning down around him. For years, he had pushed through headaches, skipped meals, canceled vacations, powered through sleepless nights. He wore his durability like a badge. "That's just who I am," he would say. "I don't break." One Tuesday morning, he sat down at his desk and felt a wave of panic unlike anything he had experienced before. His heart started racing for no clear reason. His hands trembled. His mind spiraled into catastrophic thinking. Something is wrong with me. I'm having a heart attack. My brain is failing. Everyone is going to see that I cannot actually handle this. He went to the bathroom and sat in a stall for 20 minutes, trying to breathe, trying to convince himself this would pass. It did, but it happened again the next day, and the day after that. Panic attacks that arrived without warning, leaving him afraid to be anywhere public, terrified that the next one would come in the middle of a presentation or a board meeting and expose him as a fraud. What Marcus was experiencing is what the final stage of burnout looks like. Not just exhaustion or fog or irritability, but active system failure. His nervous system, flooded with cortisol for years and operating in permanent threat mode, had crossed a threshold. It was no longer managing the load. It was buckling under it. The panic attacks were not a separate condition. They were the inevitable end state of a nervous system that has been in overdrive for so long that it has forgotten how to downregulate. When you reach this stage, burnout stops looking like a productivity problem or an emotional challenge. It starts looking like a medical crisis. Your body begins to rebel in ways that cannot be ignored or pushed through. Anxiety becomes chronic and often free-floating, not tied to any specific threat, but present like a constant companion. Some people experience panic attacks, sudden episodes of intense fear that feel like they might be dying. Others develop persistent insomnia that medication cannot seem to touch. Your mind racing when you lie down, unable to shut down even though your body is desperate for sleep. Some experience heart palpitations, muscle tension so severe it feels like being locked in a vice, or a sense of unreality where the world feels distant and fake. Physical collapse becomes more common too. Your immune system, suppressed by years of stress hormones, stops protecting you effectively. You get sick more frequently and take longer to recover. Inflammation increases throughout your body. Chronic pain appears or worsens. Your digestive system, another target of chronic stress, may rebel with stomach issues, acid reflux, or irregular bowel movements. You might experience unexplained weight loss or gain. Your body is finally speaking clearly. This cannot continue. Emotionally, the final stage often looks like complete emotional disconnection. Not the protective numbing you felt earlier, where you still had some capacity for feeling, but true emptiness, a void where your emotional life used to exist. Some people describe it as life happening in black and white, or watching yourself go through the motions like an actor on stage who has lost any connection to the character. Others experience a terrifying kind of hollowness, where even people they love feel distant and strange, where their own child's face barely registers, where they are going through the mechanics of connection but feel completely alone. Social withdrawal intensifies dramatically. You may stop answering messages, showing up to gatherings, or maintaining relationships that once mattered. This is not because you have become antisocial or mean. It is because the social world, which requires emotional energy and cognitive resources, feels impossible. Your brain does not have anything left to give. Small talk feels like trying to perform in a language you have never learned. Being around people, even people you love, feels exhausting beyond description. So you withdraw, which then creates a different kind of pain. The experience of being increasingly isolated at exactly the moment you most need support. The way you think about yourself and your future can shift into genuinely dangerous territory. Hopelessness settles in. Not the passing pessimism you might feel on a bad day, but a pervasive belief that nothing will ever be different, that you will always feel this way, that there is no point in trying because trying has only made things worse. Some people develop thoughts of self-harm or suicide, not because they want to die so much as because they cannot imagine living like this anymore. If you are experiencing these thoughts, this is the moment to reach out to a crisis line or mental health professional. Not next week, not when it feels more urgent, but now. Even if you are not at the point of suicidal ideation, you may find yourself in a kind of dangerous apathy about your own life. You stop taking care of yourself. Basic hygiene, eating, moving your body feel like impossible tasks. You lose interest in safety. You drive while exhausted, take risks that healthy you would never take. Feel indifferent about consequences that would have terrified you before. That indifference is not strength or acceptance. It is a sign that your brain has started to give up. It is the nervous system equivalent of total system shutdown. At this stage, the relationship between burnout and depression becomes nearly indistinguishable. Depression used to be thought of as something separate from burnout, a different condition with different causes. But burnout taken to its extreme generates all the hallmark symptoms of clinical depression: anhedonia, hopelessness, loss of energy, difficulty concentrating, loss of appetite or change in appetite, sleep disturbance, feelings of worthlessness, thoughts of death or suicide. Burnout doesn't just cause depression-like symptoms. In its final stage, it is depression. Work becomes completely impossible. You may attempt to show up, but your brain simply cannot function at the level required. You stare at tasks and cannot begin them. You sit in meetings and your mind is blank. You try to write an email and give up after the third word. Your performance drops dramatically. which only increases anxiety and shame. Some people get fired, others go on medical leave. Some simply stop showing up without explanation, completely dissociated from the professional consequences. The facade crumbles, and often the only thing keeping you functioning at all is crisis intervention. Medication, hospitalization, enforced rest, or some external force that finally says, stop. Physical symptoms can become severe and alarming. You might experience chest pain that sends you to the emergency room, only to be told nothing is wrong with your heart, it is just stress. You might have persistent headaches, vision changes, tremors, or numbness. Your body is in crisis mode, pumping stress chemicals that were meant for short-term survival into a system that has nowhere to put them anymore. What is crucial to understand at this point is that you have not broken. Your system has not failed because you are weak or defective. You have reached the biological limit of what your nervous system can sustain. And your body is now forcing the rest because your mind was not going to choose it. This is actually, in a strange way, your body doing its job. The final emergency brake. The reason I am painting this picture starkly is not to terrify you, but to make crystal clear what is at stake. This is not an abstract concern. This is the reality for millions of people who ignored the earlier stages, who kept pushing through, who believed they could manage forever. The earlier chapters in this book are your chance to stop before you get here. But if you recognize yourself in this description, if you are already at this edge or beyond it, you need to know that this is not where the story ends. It is actually the moment where recovery becomes possible. Because sometimes, only crisis forces the change that lesser warnings could not. What you need to do right now depends on your current state. If you are in immediate crisis, having thoughts of suicide, unable to keep yourself safe, completely unable to function, stop listening to this and reach out. Call a crisis line. Go to an emergency room. Tell someone in your life that you need help now, not later. There is no shame in that. There is only wisdom. If you are close to that edge but not quite there, your job is different. It is to stop trying to manage and start reaching out. Not to your boss, who will tell you to toughen up. Not to social media, where comparison will only deepen the wound. To a therapist, a counselor, a doctor, a trusted person in your life who can help you see what you have stopped being able to see yourself. Medical leave is not failure. Admitting you cannot do this alone is not weakness. It is the first intelligent decision you may have made in years. If you are not at this edge, but you can see it in the distance, this is your wake-up call. The things in the earlier chapters, the cognitive drain, the emotional flatness, the identity confusion, are not things you have to accept as just life now. They are a warning system, and they are very clearly saying, change course. Every chapter from this point forward is built for you. The practical steps that actually interrupt burnout, the way to restore what has been lost, the possibility of building a life that does not lead back here again. Marcus did hit this wall. He spent 6 weeks on medical leave, the first time in his career he had stopped moving long enough to really feel the extent of what had been broken. He got medication that helped ease the anxiety enough that his mind could think again. He started working with a therapist who helped him examine the story he had been telling himself about what it meant to be strong. And from that crisis came something unexpected. A real recovery. Not just a return to the old version of him who had been headed toward collapse all along. That recovery is possible for you too. But it requires accepting that hitting this wall was not a failure. It was a wake-up call you desperately needed. In Chapter 8, you are going to see what actual recovery begins to look like. and why the conventional advice about resting more and working less misses the point entirely. Recovery is not a luxury to be squeezed in around your obligations. It is the most essential work you will ever do. Keep listening. Because on the other side of this darkness is something you have forgotten was possible. Your mind and your life coming back online. Chapter 8. Repairing the Mind. The first steps to recovery. Sophia, a project manager at a tech company, finally admitted to herself at 3 a.m. on a Saturday that she could not do this anymore. She was lying awake for the 6th consecutive night, her mind racing through catastrophes that had not happened yet. Her body flooded with adrenaline that had nowhere to go. She called her doctor on Monday. By Wednesday, she had a diagnosis, a medical leave letter, and her first appointment with a therapist. She felt equal parts relief and terror. Relief because finally, externally, someone had said, "Stop." Terror because now that she had stopped moving, she had to face what had been broken by all that movement. When she tried to start recovering, she made the mistake most people make. She tried to fix everything at once. She bought a meditation app. She promised herself early mornings and gym sessions. She started reading self-help books and taking online courses about resilience and productivity optimization. She had a vague plan about healing that looked suspiciously like her old self-improvement projects, just with better intentions. Within 2 weeks, she crashed harder than before. The expectations she had placed on her recovery exhausted her more than the burnout had. Because here is what nobody tells you about recovery from burnout. Conventional wisdom about taking care of yourself is almost designed to fail you. When you are deep in burnout, your brain's operating system is compromised. Your prefrontal cortex, the part that sets goals and maintains discipline, is partially offline. Your dopamine system, the one that creates motivation and reward seeking, is severely dysregulated. Your nervous system is so hypervigilant that even positive change can feel like another demand. So when you tell yourself you're going to commit to a recovery routine, you are asking an already exhausted system to do exactly the thing that got you here. Push harder, meet higher standards, optimize better. Recovery from burnout has to work differently. It is not about forcing yourself to do more, even if what you are doing is theoretically good for you. It is about creating conditions where your nervous system can finally complete a stress cycle that has been interrupted for so long. It is about giving your brain the basic elements it needs to start rebooting. Genuine safety, true rest, minimal demands, and patience with a process that cannot be rushed. The first principle of actual recovery is this: you are not trying to get back to normal right now. Normal is what got you here. Normal is unsustainable for you, at least in the form you have been living it. What you are doing in these first weeks is something far more basic. You are trying to get your nervous system to believe that the emergency is actually over. Your amygdala, that alarm center that has been screaming for years, needs evidence repeatedly that you are safe. It does not believe you when you tell it. It needs to experience safety. That means predictability, low demands, environments where nothing is hunting you, moments where your body can actually relax instead of bracing for the next crisis. For the first 2 to 4 weeks of recovery, this is your only job. Not healing, not optimization, not building better habits. Just, can you create 24 hours where your nervous system experiences less threat than it has in years? That might sound simple. It is deceptively difficult when you are used to filling every moment with purpose and productivity. Because the moment you slow down, you start to feel everything you have been avoiding. The fatigue underneath the adrenaline, the pain underneath the numbness, the emotions underneath the fog. It can feel like things are getting worse. They are not. You are finally feeling what was always there. That is progress, even though it does not feel like it. So here is what recovery actually looks like in the first weeks, and why it bears almost no resemblance to the self-help narratives you have been taught. Your first priority is sleep, not sleep hygiene, with all its rules and optimization, but simply sleep. Your brain has been running in overdrive for so long that it has forgotten what deep rest feels like. You may need to work with a doctor to make that possible. Short-term medication to help you actually sleep, while your system relearns how to shut down, is not weakness. It is neurobiologically necessary. Without genuine sleep, nothing else in your brain can begin to repair. Your prefrontal cortex needs REM sleep to process emotional experience and form new memories. Your hippocampus needs sleep to consolidate learning and untangle the traumatic memories that have been stuck looping. Without sleep, recovery stalls completely. Your second priority is to eliminate should. For the next few weeks, strike that word from your internal vocabulary. You should not exercise. You should not meditate. You should not read improving books or take classes or network. You should not push yourself to be productive or social or anything other than minimally functional. Every should is your internalized version of the demanding world that burned you out in the first place. Right now, should is your enemy. Instead, your operating principle is this: do only what your nervous system can genuinely tolerate without spiking into stress. That is probably far less than you think. For some people, even a short walk feels like too much in the first days. For others, it is actually grounding. The metric is not whether something is objectively good for you. The metric is, does this spike my heart rate, activate my anxiety, trigger my sense of threat? If yes, do not do it yet. What might actually help in these early days is what you might call bottom rung activities. Things that are so simple and low demand that they barely register as activities at all. Sitting outside for 10 minutes without your phone. Watching the same comfort movie you have seen 5 times already. Lying in bed in a position that feels good. Listening to music you loved before everything became about optimization. Petting an animal if you have one. Drinking water you actually like the taste of. Sitting near someone you trust without having to talk. These sound trivial to the part of you that was used to conquering mountains. But to your depleted nervous system, they are profound. Many people in early recovery find that they cry more easily, or they feel inexplicably sad. This is not a sign that recovery is going wrong. It is a sign that your emotional systems are starting to reactivate after months or years of protective numbness. Your brain is beginning to process what it could not process while in survival mode. This is painful. It is also necessary. Crying is not failure. It is restoration. Let it happen. Around the 2-week mark, as your nervous system begins to get the message that it is actually safe, you may start to notice something. Boredom. Not the pleasant kind where you daydream, but a restless, uncomfortable boredom where your mind feels like it should be doing something but cannot quite access motivation. This is actually your dopamine system beginning to wake up. Right now, boring is good. Boredom is the space where your mind, given no external demands, starts to remember what it needs and wants. Do not fill that boredom with activity yet. Sit with it. During these early weeks, you will likely also notice that your patience is thin and your irritability lingers. Your nervous system has been in threat mode for so long that it is still expecting attack. You may snap at someone for a small thing. You may feel rage at a minor inconvenience. You may cry over something that would not have bothered you before. This is not regression. This is your emotional regulation returning, which initially feels like overreaction because you have not felt your real emotions in so long. They have been backed up like a dam, and now they are flowing again. Eventually, that flow will normalize. For now, be gentle with yourself and warn the people around you. My emotional regulation is returning, so you might see more of my genuine reactions. This is actually healing. What you are absolutely not ready for in these early weeks is the thing most people try to do immediately. Return to some form of purpose or productivity. Do not try to journal about your experiences. Do not create a 5-year plan. Do not use this time to finally start that project you have been putting off. Do not make recovery itself into another achievement project. When your brain is this depleted, the idea of working on yourself is counterproductive. You do not need to work. You need to rest. Here is what many people discover in these early weeks, if they can actually let themselves rest. Time moves differently. A day can feel long. Your mind, no longer racing forward to the next crisis, can actually notice what is happening around you right now. You might notice that the light comes through your window in a particular way. You might notice that you are tired even when you sleep. You might notice that you are sad. These observations are not problems to solve. They are data, your brain coming back online. Some people experience what feels like improvement and then a dip. They have a good day or two, feel like maybe recovery is happening, and then they crash again. This is completely normal. Healing is not linear. Your nervous system is learning to regulate something it has been dysregulated around for years. There will be setbacks. They are not signs that nothing is working. They are just part of the process, around week 3 or 4. When your sleep is finally stabilizing and your nervous system has genuinely started to trust that the emergency is over, you might notice something beginning to shift. A small moment where you feel something approaching calm. Not happiness, that is far away still, but a kind of absence of urgency. Those moments are rare and may feel fragile, but they are real. Your brain is beginning to repair. This is also when you might start to notice something you need to actively manage. The voice that says, "You're fine now. You can get back to your regular life." That voice is dangerous. It is actually your habitual patterns trying to reassert themselves, your old life trying to pull you back in. Recognize it for what it is. An attempt to return to the very thing that broke you. Recovery does not mean you are ready to return to normal life. It means you are finally stable enough to begin asking the deeper questions about what a sustainable life might look like. The practice for this critical first phase is deceptively simple, and you may resist it because it seems too small. Create one genuine, no-demand moment each day. Not self-care, which has become another achievement category. Not a meditation that is supposed to work. Just a moment where you are allowed to exist without any expectation of output or improvement. 15 minutes where nobody needs anything from you, where you are not trying to fix anything, where you are simply permitted to be alive and tired and here. If you have the capacity, add one small stabilizing action. Take a short walk without your phone, or sit outside for a few minutes, or do some movement that your body actually wants rather than your discipline demands. Not because it is good for you, because for those few minutes, your body is not performing. It is just existing. And here is something critical. If thoughts of suicide or self-harm intensify during this phase, this is not a sign that recovery is failing. It can actually be a sign that your emotions are returning enough to feel the depth of your pain. But it is also a sign that you need more support than you can provide yourself. Tell your doctor, your therapist, or call a crisis line. This is not giving up. This is getting the support that makes recovery possible. What makes these first weeks so difficult is that nothing seems to be happening. You are not achieving anything. You are not becoming anything. You are just existing in a depleted state, and it feels useless. But underneath that invisibility, something profound is occurring. Your amygdala is learning that threats are not constant. Your cortisol levels are finally dropping. Your sleep-deprived brain is beginning to consolidate memories. Your hippocampus is stabilizing. Your prefrontal cortex is starting to thicken again. You cannot see any of this happening, but it is. Recovery is not a linear journey with clear milestones and measurable progress. It is a gradual recalibration of a nervous system that has been running in the wrong mode for far too long. And it cannot be rushed. The people who recover best from burnout are the ones who accept this paradox. The only way to move forward is to stop trying to move forward for a while. In Chapter 9, you will begin to see what happens as your nervous system continues to stabilize, how you can gradually start reintroducing structure and intention in ways that do not recreate the very conditions that led to burnout. But that comes later. For now, your only assignment is to be here, to let your body rest, to give your brain permission to be offline. That is enough. That is everything. Chapter 9. Rebuilding Yourself. Long-term strategies for a resilient brain. There is a quiet, unsettling moment in recovery that almost no one prepares you for. It comes after the worst has passed, after the panic attacks have softened, after sleep begins to return, after your mind no longer feels like a constant emergency. You wake up one morning, look around your life, and realize, I cannot go back to how things were. But I have no idea yet what instead looks like. This in-between place is dangerous and powerful at the same time. Dangerous because old habits are still strong and the world keeps trying to pull you back into the same patterns that broke you. Powerful because for the first time in a long time, you have enough clarity and enough distance to ask a question you've avoided for years. What would it look like to build a life my brain can actually live in? Caroline, a physician in her late 30s, reached that point about 6 months after she hit her own burnout wall. The crisis phase had passed. She had taken leave from work, started therapy, adjusted her medication, rebuilt her sleep. Her panic had quieted. She could go for walks again without feeling like her heart would explode. She laughed sometimes. She could read a few pages of a book. On the surface, she looked better. But when her clinic suggested a timeline for her to return full-time, something in her tightened. She could feel the old identity stirring. The competent doctor, the reliable colleague, the one who took extra shifts, who never said no. She knew exactly how to slide back into that version of herself. The script was still there, ready to be reloaded. At the same time, a quieter, newer part of her whispered, if you go back like before, you will not survive this a second time. This is where rebuilding begins. In that tension between the life that is familiar and the one that would actually allow you to stay whole. Rebuilding after burnout is not about getting stronger so you can endure more of the same. It is about becoming different, so you no longer accept a life that treats your brain as endlessly disposable. Resilience is not the ability to tolerate higher levels of abuse from your environment. Real resilience is the ability to recognize earlier when something is unsustainable and to choose differently before your system collapses again. There are 3 layers to this rebuilding: how you think, how you live, and how you respond to your own warning signs. All 3 matter. All 3 have to change. The first layer is mental, the patterns of thought that quietly pushed you toward burnout in the first place. Chances are, you carry beliefs like these somewhere inside you. My worth is tied to my productivity. Rest must be earned. Saying no means I am weak, selfish, or lazy. If I don't do it, everything will fall apart. These beliefs may have helped you achieve things. They also almost destroyed you. Your brain is plastic. It rewires based on what you repeatedly think, feel, and do. For years, you rewarded yourself for overextending, silently praised yourself for going beyond your limits, measured your value by how much you could endure. Those repeated thoughts carve deep grooves in your neural pathways. Rebuilding means gently, consistently carving new ones. This does not require affirmations you don't believe. It requires catching harmful thoughts in real time and offering your brain a different option. When you hear the old voice say, "If I rest now, I'm falling behind," you pause and answer it with something more accurate. "If I don't rest now, I'm repeating the pattern that almost broke me." When you feel the urge to say yes automatically, you add a small buffer. "I'll get back to you after I check what I actually have energy for." These are tiny shifts, but over months they train your brain to associate safety and self-respect, not only achievement, with reward. The second layer of rebuilding is structural. The way your days, weeks, and commitments are organized. Your nervous system needs rhythm, not rigid schedules that box you in, but predictable patterns that let your brain anticipate rest instead of living in constant suspense. This is where you begin creating what you might call a rest architecture for your life, not as a luxury, but as a non-negotiable foundation. That architecture has 3 levels. Daily, small pauses that interrupt the stress cycle before it spirals. A 10-minute walk without your phone after lunch. 2 minutes of closing your eyes and breathing between meetings. A rule that you don't check email in bed. Your brain doesn't need hour-long rituals. It needs frequent, reliable signals that the threat level is dropping. Weekly, pockets of real off time where your brain is not responsible for work, not even in the background. That might look like one evening where devices are off, and the only purpose is to exist, not to produce or optimize. It might be a half day at the end of the week where you do physically restorative tasks, cooking, gardening, being outside, not as chores, but as ways to be in your body without a performance. Seasonal, moments during the year when you step further away. A stretch of days where you are not reachable in case of emergency, because the emergency culture is exactly what you are recovering from. This might not be possible immediately or perfectly, but rebuilding means working gradually toward the reality that your life contains real, extended recovery periods, not just brief collapses between rounds of overwork. The third layer of rebuilding is learning to listen to your own early warning signs and to respect them the first time instead of the 20th. Your body and brain told you for years that something was wrong. You felt the heaviness, the fog, the irritability, the dread. You overrode those signals because your story about yourself demanded that you be stronger than your own biology. From now on, the rule has to change. Your signals are not negotiable. When your sleep starts to fragment again, that is not an inconvenience. It is an alarm. When simple tasks begin to feel like wading through mud, that is not a personal failing. It is a sign that your cognitive load is too high. When you notice you are going numb emotionally or snapping at people you care about, that is not just how you are. It is your nervous system asking for less, not more. This will require courage, because listening to these signs often means disappointing others. Saying no, turning down opportunities that look good on paper but feel wrong in your body, pushing back on expectations that used to define you. You may fear that people will see you as weaker, less dedicated, less valuable. Some will. Many will not. And the ones who value only the version of you that destroys itself for their benefit are not the people you can afford to organize your life around anymore. Rebuilding also means reclaiming your autonomy, your right to decide what your life is for, not just what it produces. Burnout thrives in environments where you feel powerless, where your choices don't matter, where you are constantly reacting instead of initiating. One of the most healing shifts you can make is to ask, regularly and honestly, what do I want my energy for? Not, what should I be doing? Not, what do others expect? But, if my brain is a finite resource, where do I want to spend it? Your answers do not have to be grand or impressive. They might be as simple as, I want enough energy to be patient with my children, or I want to feel clear enough to enjoy one hobby, or I want to do work that doesn't require me to be in crisis mode every day. These preferences matter. When you begin aligning your commitments, even slightly, with what you actually value, your brain spends less time fighting itself and more time cooperating. A crucial part of long-term resilience is building a system of recovery, not counting on willpower in the moment. Willpower is unreliable when you are tired. Systems carry you when motivation vanishes. That system can be surprisingly simple. You commit to a sleep window that you defend the way you used to defend urgent work. You establish tech boundaries, specific hours where devices are off or out of reach. You schedule breaks into your calendar the way you once scheduled meetings. You identify one or two people you can be honest with about your state before you reach crisis. You decide in advance what too much looks like, so you don't negotiate with yourself while you are already overwhelmed. There will be times when you slip. You will say yes when you meant to say no. You will scroll late into the night. You will push through warning signs because an old fear flares up. Slips are not failures. They are information. Each one gives you another chance to ask, what made it hard to protect myself here? And what tiny change could make it easier next time? Here is your practice for this chapter. Something concrete that begins turning ideas into actual structure. Take 10 minutes and write down 3 early warning signs that your brain is approaching overload. Not the obvious crisis signs. You already know those. The earlier ones. Maybe it is forgetting small things you normally remember. Maybe it is a specific heaviness on Sunday nights. Maybe it is the way you start numbing out with your phone instead of answering messages. Circle one of these signs. Next to it, write a pre-decided response you will practice from now on when that sign appears. For example, when I start forgetting appointments, I will cancel one non-essential commitment that week. Or, when I feel that Sunday dread, I will not add anything new to my calendar for the coming week without removing something else. Or, when I notice I am scrolling instead of responding, I will put my phone in another room for 15 minutes and do one small grounding activity. You are teaching your nervous system a new association. When I am approaching my limit, I respond with protection, not punishment. Over time, this becomes a reflex. Rebuilding yourself after burnout is slow, sometimes frustrating work. It can feel strangely ordinary. There are no fireworks when you go to bed on time, when you say no to an extra project, when you choose a quiet evening over another demand. But this is where your new life is actually built. Not in dramatic reinventions, but in small, repeated acts of self-respect. As you continue, something gradual and profound begins to happen. The person you thought you lost, the one with curiosity, humor, desire, presence starts to reappear. Not all at once, and not as a copy of who you were before. Different. Softer in some ways, stronger in others. Less willing to trade health for approval. More willing to disappoint others rather than abandon yourself. That is the beginning of life after burnout, not just life away from it. In the final chapter, you will see what that new life can look like. Not perfect, not free of stress, but grounded in a different way of being. A life where your brain is not an enemy or a machine to be used up, but a partner you live with, listen to, and protect. A life where burnout becomes not your defining story, but the turning point that led you back to yourself. Chapter 10. A New Beginning. Life after burnout. Thomas sat on his porch one October evening, watching the light fade behind the trees, and realized he had not checked his email in 3 days. Not because he was on vacation, not because he had set a boundary or done a digital detox challenge. He simply had not thought about it. His mind, which for years had been a constant scanning radar for obligations, threats, and opportunities, had finally, genuinely, quieted down. He felt the absence of that scanning like a heavy coat he had taken off and forgotten he was carrying. It was not happiness. It was relief so profound, it felt like a new kind of peace. 6 months earlier, Thomas had been the director of operations at a logistics company, the kind of person who solved problems before anyone else noticed them, who answered emails at midnight, who kept the whole machine running through sheer force of will. Burnout had taken him down hard. Panic attacks, insomnia, a complete inability to make even minor decisions. He had taken medical leave, spent weeks doing almost nothing, rebuilt his sleep, worked with a therapist, and slowly, painfully, returned to something like functional. But what he discovered in the months that followed was not a return to his old self. It was the emergence of a different person living in the same body, with different priorities, different tolerances, and a different relationship to the world. This is what life after burnout can look like when recovery is real. Not a perfect, stress-free existence, but a fundamentally different way of being in the world. One where your brain is no longer your enemy and your life is no longer organized around the principle of maximum output. The first thing that returns, often surprisingly, is desire. Not the grand, ambitious drive that pushed you before, but simple, quiet wants. You wake up and realize you would like coffee. Not because you need caffeine to function, but because the idea of coffee sounds pleasant. You noticed you want to see a particular friend, not because networking, but because you miss their company. You feel a small tug toward a hobby you abandoned years ago. Painting, walking, playing music, reading fiction. And you follow it, not because it is productive, but because it feels like something you might actually enjoy. These small returns of wanting are the first sign that your dopamine system is coming back online, not as a reward for achievement, but as a guide to what genuinely feels good. Your ability to plan and execute returns too, but differently. Before burnout, you might have planned a week with military precision, filling every hour with tasks, optimizing for maximum efficiency. After real recovery, you find you can still plan. But the planning feels less like a fight against chaos and more like a gentle arrangement of priorities. You can hold a complex project in your mind again, but you no longer feel the need to solve every piece of it right now. You can break tasks into steps, but you also notice when breaking them down is just another form of over-planning avoidance. Your prefrontal cortex has healed enough to give you back executive function, but without the addictive urgency that made every task feel like a crisis. Perhaps the most profound shift is in your sense of identity. You are no longer someone who defines themselves by what they can endure. That old story, I am the person who can handle anything, who never breaks, who delivers no matter what, has been replaced by a quieter, more honest narrative. I am someone who knows their limits, who values their health, who chooses not to destroy themselves for any goal, no matter how worthy. This is not a smaller identity. It is a more truthful, sustainable one. It does not feel as dramatic or heroic. It feels like peace. You may also find that your relationships change. Some people in your life, the ones who valued you only for your productivity, your availability, your willingness to sacrifice, may drift away. That is painful, but it is also clarifying. The relationships that remain are often deeper, more honest, built on something other than what you can do for them. You become more selective about who you give your energy to. And you notice that your capacity for genuine connection is greater than it was before, because you are no longer performing connection while your system is screaming for relief. Your work may also change, sometimes dramatically. Some people return to the same field but with new boundaries, new roles, or a new understanding that they cannot and will not do what they did before. Others discover that the field itself was part of the problem. Not because the work was bad, but because the culture demanded unsustainable sacrifice. Some change careers entirely, moving into something slower, more meaningful, more aligned with what they actually want their life to be about. There is no single right answer. The only wrong answer is to return to the same conditions that burned you out and expect a different outcome. Financially, this transition can be frightening. You may have to make difficult choices, downsizing, asking for part-time work, negotiating new terms, living on less for a while. That is real. That is hard. But the cost of returning to the old pattern is your health, your relationships, and potentially your life. Some costs are too high to keep paying. You will also discover that your relationship with productivity itself has changed. You may still work hard, but you no longer confuse being busy with being valuable. You can sit still and feel okay about it. You can have a slow day and not spiral into self-criticism. You can rest without needing to justify it. This is not laziness. This is emotional and neurological maturity. It is what happens when you have finally learned that your worth is not contingent on output. One of the most surprising things people report after genuine recovery is that they feel more creative, not less. The ideas that used to require frantic brainstorming now arrive quietly, during walks, during moments of boredom, during conversations that are not about solving anything. Your brain, no longer drowning in cortisol, has room to make novel connections again. It is not that you have lost your edge. It is that your edge has been replaced by something more sustainable: depth. Here is what you need to understand about this new version of yourself. It is not a lesser version. It may feel that way at first, especially when you compare yourself to the version of you that could work 18-hour days and never flinch. But that version was living on borrowed time, burning through resources you did not realize were finite. This version is living within your actual capacity. It may look slower on the outside, but it is more powerful in the long run because it can actually continue. The people who know you best may not recognize you at first. They may say you have changed, that you are not as driven, that you seem less ambitious. That is because they are measuring you by the old metrics: output, speed, availability. You are now measuring yourself by different ones: sustainability, presence, health, peace. Those metrics are invisible to people who are still running on the old system. Trust them anyway. Your desires will continue to evolve. Things you thought you wanted may fall away. Things you never considered may suddenly matter. You might realize that the career you fought so hard to build is no longer what you want your life to be about. That is not failure. That is growth. Burnout has a way of stripping away the external shoulds and leaving you with what is actually yours. Listen to that. It is rare to get that clarity while you are still healthy enough to act on it. Practically, this new life requires new systems, not just new intentions. You need to build guardrails that protect your new boundaries from the world's constant pressure to erode them. That might look like a sleep schedule you defend the way you once defended your inbox. Tech boundaries that are non-negotiable, devices off by 9 p.m., no work email on weekends, no notifications after hours. A weekly review where you check your energy levels, not just your to-do list, and remove one commitment if you are dipping. A trusted person you can be honest with when you notice warning signs, before they become crises. A pre-decided response to the question, can you take on one more thing that is not yes by default? These are not restrictions. They are the architecture of a life that will not break you again. One final, profound shift. You start to experience time differently. Before burnout, time was something to maximize, to fill, to race against. After recovery, time becomes something you inhabit. A slow morning feels like a gift, not a waste. An unscheduled afternoon feels like spaciousness, not panic. You can sit and do nothing and feel okay about it. That is not laziness. That is the recovery of your ability to be present, which is what life actually is. If you are at the end of this book and you recognize yourself somewhere in these chapters, here is what I want you to know. You are not broken. You are not weak. You are not failing. You are a human being with a nervous system that has been pushed past its limits by a world that demands more than biology can give. The fact that you are still here, still listening, still considering change, is proof of resilience, not failure. The life you can build after burnout is not a smaller life. It is a more honest one. It is a life where you stop treating your brain as an enemy to be conquered and start treating it as a partner to be cared for. It is a life where you stop measuring yourself by what you can endure and start measuring yourself by how much you can enjoy, how deeply you can connect, how peacefully you can simply exist. That life is not a fantasy. It is possible. It is waiting for you, piece by piece, choice by choice, beginning today. You do not have to have everything figured out. You do not have to know exactly what your new life will look like. You only have to begin. One small boundary. One honest conversation. One evening where you choose rest over obligation. Those small choices are not trivial. They are the architecture of a life that will not burn you out again. If you are still in the thick of burnout, you may not believe this is possible. You may feel too depleted to imagine feeling differently. That is okay. You do not need to believe everything will be perfect. You only need to believe that something different is possible, and that you are willing to try one thing today that protects you a little more than yesterday. That is enough. That is the beginning. The version of you that emerges after burnout is not the old you, patched up and sent back into the same war. It is someone new, someone wiser, someone who knows the cost of ignoring your own limits and is finally ready to live within them. That version of you has been waiting a long time. It is time to let them come home.